Welcome, Chiefs Kingdom, to another edition of the Out of Structure Podcast. I'm Matt Stagner here with Ron Kopp Jr. as usual. Thanks to Caleb for filling in last week for me while I did some real world stuff. We are back on another victory Monday, Tuesday, early week victory day for the Chiefs here, but it doesn't feel quite like a victory to me, Ron. It was an interesting week for the Chiefs.
Yeah, beating the Jets only 23-20 was definitely not something anyone expected. I predicted 31-10. You know, the week after I predicted the Bears making it a little closer than they made it. You know, this Chiefs team, man, they're hard to pin down, man. You know, I swear and we'll get some questions about that. You know, you guys asked some good questions about it, but you know, they had the 17-0 lead, Stags, 3 minutes left in the first quarter, looked like the route was on, ended up being a close game, but they did get to 3-1. They are back, you know, 3 games in a row, 3 wins in a row. Good to see that. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting game, Stags. You know, Zach Wilson having his best game of his career against the Chiefs was not something I expected, Stags. How'd you take Zach Wilson kind of coming alive against this Chiefs defense that we thought was all of a sudden like the best in the Spags era, which it still could be, right? Obviously. And we're having some fun right now. But
they looked pretty stifling in that first quarter. I mean, there was no Zach Wilson couldn't get anything going. There was pass rush. There was good coverage. It was a very clean, really, really solid tackling first quarter. And then, yeah, there was that sequence there where everything just changed and the whole tone of this game. And did it start with the safety? Was that the turning point of the whole game? A safety on another penalty on Chiefs offensive tackle, Jawaan Taylor, really turned the tide of this game. Safeties are always a momentum changer just because you get points and the ball. That's obviously a big deal, but something changed right then and there. And from there forward, Zach Wilson found some confidence, and it was a ball game.
Yeah, Jawaan Taylor now leads the NFL with all offensive line with 10 penalties this year, according to PFF. The second most is 7 penalties. By a second-year player, you know, kind of in Ekem Akonwu. In Carolina, you know, Jawaan Taylor, vet, you know, it is pretty ridiculous at this point how many penalties he's getting. Mm-hmm. You know, he's doing great in pass protection. 8 pressures is a very low total for an offensive tackle in the NFL comparatively. But yeah, you know, that was a turning point. And I will say the refs kind of missed it, right? The broadcast did a good job pointing it out that, you know, the face mask did start outside of the end zone, so it shouldn't have necessarily been a safety, but still not something you want to see happen. And then obviously that kind of somehow got the Jets offense going because they kicked a field goal on the next drive, and they really started getting the play action game going. And it was a good schemed up game from the Jets offense. All of a sudden, I've only watched the first half of the defense film wise this morning, but. You know, after, like you said, a stifling first portion of the game, Zach Wilson got in a rhythm because the Jets kept going play action. They kept going heavy protection, you know, not letting the pass rush get there. And Garrett Wilson did, you know, find space. You know, other receivers found space. Allen Lazard made that big play over Trent McDuffie down the field. You know, that it was kind of an interesting game, a good test for the Chiefs defense and maybe a little wake-up call that, you know, hey, you know, even if you're playing Zach Wilson, if you're not on your P's and Q's, especially in the secondary, you can still make some big plays happen. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously, but then Zach Wilson happened, right, Sags? Then he fumbles the snap, and with 7 minutes left, they didn't get the ball back, and that was the coolest part to me.
That was shades of the Super Bowl this last year. I had that kind of image in my head all the way down to the sliding down at the goal line to run the clock out. That was to kill 7 minutes is absurd, especially for this Chiefs offense, which is not known for that necessarily. But you could tell that they knew situationally what they were going to do there. And a lot of it came down to running Patrick Mahomes. I wrote the winners and losers column this week as usual. And very unusually, I put Patrick Mahomes in both columns. Patrick Mahomes running the ball was a winner, and Patrick Mahomes throwing the ball was not this week.
Yeah, no, I know. I saw that. That was funny. I got a good chuckle out of that because you're right. Like Mahomes running the ball 51 yards. He had, I highlighted it in an article, actually should be out for the site by the time people are listening to this. You know, he had 4 impactful first downs on his legs. Actually, one of them was the fumbled snap that we all of a sudden got a quarterback sneak out of. First quarterback sneak since the Denver game.
That's all it took.
But then he had the Super Bowl, the shades of Super Bowl, like you just mentioned, the same drive, that 25-yard scramble up the middle where he finds space and takes advantage and gets a first down. Obviously, there's a holding penalty on the defense on that play, so it would have been a first down anyway. And then he has the scramble to ice the game. Chiefs bettors at -9 or 9.5. You got to be sick. I mean, I know I didn't bet him. My grandpa did. Shout out Don Kopp. He's got to be sick. He's got to be sick. He was sick, I should say. But I will say, I have this cool stat from the game. The Chiefs had 12 first downs over their first 9 possessions in the game. The last 2 drives of the game, they had 12 first downs itself. So they doubled their first down total for the game over the last 2 possessions, because it wasn't just that drive. It was the second to last drive. I believe I have it here, 14 plays and ended in a field goal. So the last 2 drives for the Chiefs were 29 plays, about 14 or almost 15 minutes of time of possession. Only 3 points out of those 2 possessions, but it ended the game. Obviously, they could have scored at the last. So it was a game of the offense, the running offense. We haven't talked about like an Isiah Pacheco yet, but the running offense picking up a pretty bad pass offense. But they got it done when they needed to in terms of controlling the ball and icing the game.
Great point there. And we've got lots of great questions from you all this week. Just as a reminder, we answer your questions usually in the second half of the show. So stick with us for that. We're here every Tuesday with analysis of the previous game. We'll answer your questions. Just give us something fun to talk about. So make sure you submit those on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, and email those questions.
Always Twitter. It's always Twitter.
And if you'd like, you can also email those to apoutofstructure@gmail.com. And Ron will check that email inbox, I hope, and we will get some good questions out of it. So let's get down to the breakdown. What else did you see from the game this week in your Insta breakdown?
Yes, I do the Insta breakdown for the site. You mentioned your winners and losers, so we both have some post-game responsibilities. And yeah, I liked your winners and losers mentioned about Mahomes' running attack. We just talked about that. But the real theme of the game was Isiah Pacheco. He was the offensive player of the game for me. He had a career game, both in rushing yards and total yards, because not only did he have 115 or 16 rushing yards on the ground and had the 48-yard run to get the scoring going, which was a great, I love the call by Andy Reid. I'll break it down real quick. They got Donovan Smith as the left tackle, right? But they bring Jawan Taylor over from right tackle to kind of a tight end next to the left tackle. It's called an overload formation. They're going to run power to that side, which means those guys are down blocking, collapsing the defensive line. Trey Smith's pulling into space. He's just going to latch on to the play side linebacker, which happened to be this poor, safety. I think he was just coming down in the box and he didn't know it was coming, man. Pancake City all of a sudden, and Pacheco was gone. I will say Donovan Smith, shout out, the veteran got away with a savvy little hold there, kind of holding onto an ankle of a defensive end. And Jermaine Johnson did shout it out on Twitter. The Jets defense is salty, Stags. We haven't talked about that yet, but Ahmad Gardner's salty, Jermaine Johnson salty. And that play, there was good reason. I mean, Donovan Smith basically held onto his ankle for a solid second. But anyway, Isiah Pacheco has a huge game, and I do want to shout out too, though, his ability in the check down game. He had 3 catches for like 40 yards. He made the most of those plays when I feel like sometimes he doesn't, and so it was just a good, really overall game from Pacheco.
Yeah, he was huge, and he brings that energy, that fire that the team needs sometimes. Every single time against the Jets, when the offense needed a spark, it was Pacheco. Like that was really cool to see. He's always sort of been that guy, but they don't always give him that many opportunities. He had 20 carries in this game, plus the 3 targets, turned into 3 catches, 23 touches for Pacheco. I think we've talked about this before. He's one of those guys that needs volume to get going. Clyde is the same way, frankly, and he did not have a solid game. Clyde didn't. He just wasn't able to get going out of the blocks. But I think both of those guys need volume if you want to see any kind of production out of them. So you can't really judge a guy on 3 or 4 touches. Get him 25 touches, over 20 touches a game and see what they can do. Pacheco was a monster all day long, consistently brought that energy. I love seeing the tweets about him running like he's angry at the ground. Like this is a really this is just an impactful, energy giver for this offense. And And they really, and I know we have a question about this, but I'd love to see them stay balanced like this going forward.
Well, and they really fed into that energy, probably being back in his home state. I didn't think about it going into the game, but they kind of kept mentioning it. And anyone who watched the latest episode of the franchise, I will say another great episode, production by the Chiefs. They highlighted Pacheco, kind of, high school, his hometown in Jersey, kind of a small town, small school. And, he went back home Sunday night and had a great game. So shout out him. But, on the flip side of the offense, there was the passing game, right? Not as pretty. We saw it early. We saw Patrick Mahomes find Noah Gray down the field early for a huge touchdown. That was cool to see. We saw some things, with Kelsey. Kelsey got open, but man, Mahomes just at some points just forced the ball a couple times where you don't normally see him force that pass. I kind of mentioned it in my AP Premier. Shout out the newsletter that we send out from Arrowhead Pride. Make sure you subscribe if you're interested. I give kind of, a more opinionated, analysis of the game each week. And something I mentioned is just that, these first few weeks, he wasn't testing those tight windows and he was holding on to it. And we were kind of complaining about like, okay, receivers aren't getting into these windows and finding them. And Mahomes just isn't triggering because of it. And that's why the pass offense is kind of slowing down. Well, this game, these couple times, he just triggered into him kind of for no reason to me. Like both of them were not open, in my opinion. He had to have the perfect pass to even get him there. But even if he got him there, his receiver is going to get crunched by 2 or 3 defenders because it's in between a really tight window downfield. They were interesting passes and interesting decisions to me. Both times he wasn't pressured. He was kind of in a clean pocket where he was kind of navigating the pocket and kind of had time to make that decision. So, it was one of those games where the Jets defense really made him uncomfortable. We've seen this against guys, defenses like Tennessee last year, against Denver at times in the past, where he does have those rough games. But Stags, what he always does in these games is use his legs. And it's funny, I noted this in my article. 8 of the 9 times he's rushed for 50 yards in his career, he's had less than a 90 passer rating. So he does it when he needs to. And this is a perfect example of that, because the passing game, he was just not feeling himself, and no one was getting open. I buried that point in that no one was getting open, but this time it just seemed like he forced those throws into tight windows instead of the 3 weeks prior. He kind of was being more casual, or being more conservative, I should say, and not testing the tight windows. For some reason on Sunday, he kind of forced his way into it a couple times.
And it wasn't just that he was forcing them; he was forcing these touch passes
exactly.
In a way that's not really him. It's not like he's ripping it in there like he's able to. Those were spots where you had to drop this rainbow in a bucket, and it just. Yeah, something was off about that. And I don't, like you said, maybe it was the defense, maybe it was people not getting open, but wasn't his day. At least 3/4 of it wasn't his day. But yeah, he was brilliant on the ground, and Pacheco was the man. 204 rushing yards for the team, 5.8 yards per carry on average, which also happens to be Pacheco's average, 5.8. So you've got some real success there on the ground. Even Sky Moore getting a couple of carries. He had 2 for 19 so averaging almost 10 yards a carry on his 2 carries. One was 11 yards, one was 8. So there's not necessarily how you want to see Sky Moore used, and not necessarily how we hope to see him. He didn't have a catch on 2 targets. In fact, I think at least one of those, I felt like he had a shot at it, or he at least could have been in position to make a play. He just doesn't seem to be, getting any traction at this point as that go-to receiver that we thought he would be. Yeah,
no, you're right. That first third down of the drive, I called it a 3 and out on Twitter. Just late night brain. Obviously, it was a later in the drive. It could have extended a drive and maybe scored a touchdown, but. Sprint right. This is a very, very fundamental play in the Chiefs offense. A lot of times on 3rd and short, they love to do is Tyreek with anybody with any sort of, ability to create separation at the top of their route, like Sky Moore should be able to with the 10-yard split, with the things we've seen him do in his career. He did create, separation to an extent, but he just doesn't explode out of his break there. He doesn't come back to the ball hard. And then that's why the ball's a little long and low and outside to him. And like some people, you could see that and say, well, look, Mahomes threw it, too low and outside. Like that's a bad throw on Mahomes. To me, if you watch Sky, he just is way too casual coming out of the break. He just kind of turns and waits for the ball to be on him. You got to drive off. He gets 3 yards past the first down marker to have all that space to drive hard and get away from the corner. Because if you're casual out of your break and the ball is inside at all and you don't drive hard, like that corner's going to jump it and get a pick. So yeah, it to me, that was on Sky. I highlighted that on Twitter, and those kind of things are just, it's the stuff we kind of saw with McColl at times. I hate to say it. And, the thing with Sky is he doesn't have that trait that McColl had to keep him in the rotation. So if Sky doesn't, get this chemistry with Mahomes together, he's going to get phased out for a guy like Rashee Rice, who again turned 3 catches into 32 yards, had an 18-yard reception at one point. He's going to continue to get snaps, and he's a slot receiver, and that's where Sky's been playing. So it's not trending in the right direction, I'd say, for the second-year wideout.
I would agree there. One that I thought was interesting, I'm curious to get your take on, is Kadarius Toney. He had 2 plays back-to-back that he made that were tremendous plays, showed a lot of toughness, a lot of grit. His stats, again, nothing to write home about, 2 catches, 22 yards. But those were big plays. They were back-to-back, and then they didn't go back to him. I'm curious. Again, I thought that was a small positive sign from Toney, but then the usage still isn't there. He's getting snaps. He's just not getting not getting the ball.
Yeah, no, it is odd. He only had 17 snaps all game. Blake Bell had 16 snaps. So you're talking about, Blake Bell and Kadarius Toney being on offense the same amount. That's not how it should be, in my opinion. And that might change if again, a guy like Sky, who is getting these jet sweeps. He did get 19 yards, right, Stags? That's great. But in my opinion, Toney and Hardman and other people like would have maybe made more out of those plays because they have maybe better open field ability, better explosion. Kadarius Toney can make people, we saw it against Jacksonville, 3 straight plays. He gained like 40 yards because he just kept making people miss in the open field. That's where, I am surprised, Toney isn't being used more in those roles rather than Sky because of that. But I think it tells you that they want the Sky to be on the field. They want to give him a chance to prove himself. But it's just through 4 games, he hasn't really given them much of a, he had the broken play against Jacksonville, that gave him a lot of yards, that ballooned his stats a little bit. And then he had the touchdown. That was a great play, but that's the only play we've seen Sky make this year. Yeah. And so Toney, it's like Toney's made plays. He's had the drops in week 1, but he's made plenty of plays. So, I think you're just going to, if Toney can stay healthy, prove he can stay healthy, which he had the toe injury, I guess, recently, right? That he was limited in practice at one point. Maybe that's one of the reasons here. They're just kind of preserving him, right, for the end of the season. Because not a bad idea, but it's trend. It's trending that he's going to play more, I would imagine.
Well, it's what we've seen all season. Patrick Mahomes had 30 attempts, and 9 of those went to Travis Kelce. But he still targeted 10 different players. So you've got 21 attempts to divide amongst the other 9 receivers that were targeted. So there's really no volume to go anywhere. I mean, Rashee Rice had 5 targets himself. So there's really, again, you talk about volume with the running backs. These wide receivers are getting spread super thin, and I don't know if they're just waiting for somebody to really force their hand. I know part of their offensive philosophy is to spread the ball around, but maybe it's spread too thin at this point.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's actually a point I don't want to steal Nate's thunder, but Nate Christensen's going to write about for the site for us is if that distribution, is it getting too thin and they need to kind of start cutting people out a little bit to make it more efficient. So I'll let him do that on the site, and we'll talk about the defense, Stags, in terms of a defensive player of the game from my Insta breakdown. And you had him in your winners section as well. Mike Edwards, the safety, the veteran safety, coming up, making a bunch of plays. He had a tackle for loss. He had a sack. He had a pass deflection that was almost a pick that ended a drive. I made this note, in my post-game thoughts that, he's making more plays than Brian Cook. And actually, Stags, I was looking at the film this morning, and on one particular stretch of the game in the nickel packages, he was playing over Brian Cook. They had him in rather than Cook, which they've had Cook in all year as a safety. There was no injury reported. The Chiefs are pretty good about letting you know if there was a little bang up or something, and that's why Cook was out. Maybe there was something that they just didn't report. That could always be the case, but it's not a coincidence that Edwards was making more plays too. And Justin Reed has been very solid this year. He's playing his role very well as that strong safety. Brian Cook, as a free safety, you don't get as many plays to be made. He made a great play on that solo tackle down the field right later in the game on Breece Hall on this 45-yard run. It could have been a touchdown that he saved. That's a great play, but making tackles 45 yards down the field isn't necessarily what you want your safeties to be doing, or why you want to be pointing to them, okay, he should be playing because of this. I think Edwards is making more plays right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if he starts playing over Cooks. And this game was a good example. What do you think about that, Stags?
Yeah, I mean, why do you bring in Mike Edwards? What was the point of signing him? He was a guy known to be a ball hawk. He was somebody that you bring in to force turnovers. And so far this season, I think he's been doing a good job of that, as good as anybody in the Chiefs secondary. And so, yeah, I mean, you want somebody who's a creator back there. Obviously, there's a role for a safety who's just a preventer, which is maybe what Justin Reed's been. But you also like to see that creator from the safety position making plays. And yeah, maybe you go with the hot hand a little bit more. I don't think it's an indictment on Brian Cook's career. I just think there's going to be maybe a little bit of a shift towards Edwards. They need somebody who's going to cause turnovers, and this defense has been very solid, but you need that to get to that next level. I think they need more turnovers, more big plays out of the defense, positive plays out of the defense. And maybe Edwards gives them the best chance to do that right now.
No, it's a really good point with the turnovers, because if you think about all their turnovers this year, like, they've run into a few of them. Wilson fumbling the snap is not a caused turnover or forced turnover. You think about week 2, the lateral pass, with Lawrence, that's a fumble. That's not a forced turnover. McDuffie has had these 2 forced fumbles, but you're right. This team isn't creating turnovers right now. And Edwards is one of these guys that almost did this week. He was the one who almost jumped that route and got the pick. And again, like you said, he's known for being a ball hawk. And yeah, I'm someone who's super high on Brian Cook, but this team uses 3 safeties, and I think he can still have a role as that third safety. But it just seems to me, I want Edwards to be playing more right now, to my eye. And maybe it's because we haven't been playing, maybe against a better quarterback, we'll change our opinion, because, they have been playing Zach Wilson and Justin Fields these last 2 weeks. But, and we're going to get it this week. Minnesota is a good test for this secondary right now. They throw a lot, and Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison is a nice little receiver duo. So, all right, Stags, I think it's a good time to talk about some quarter season. You always talk about how the NFL season's in quarters, right? What does Todd Haley say?
I don't know. What does Todd say? What does Todd Haley say? I don't remember a lot of what he said. Most of it you can't repeat on the air anyway. So.
That's true. That's true. Well, the NFL season's played in quarters, right? I mean, although not anymore. Not anymore.
Yeah, quarter-ish. Technically, the quarter of the season will be over after the first quarter of the Vikings game, right? So there's
we'll check in then.
We'll check in then. No, Todd Haley did like to look at the season in quarters and say the goal is to win 3 out of 4 in each quarter. Chiefs did exactly that this quarter. They lost the first game, won the next 3. So 3-1 in this quarter. You can check that box, because if you do that 4 times, you end up at least with 12 wins, pretty likely to win your division and be in the playoffs and have a shot at everything that you've worked for that season. So I think it's a pretty good way of looking at it. It helps you, if you take a loss, it helps you sort of contextualize that and say, we can move past that as long as we get back on the horse for the rest of that quarter. But yeah, Ryan, you did some research here, and I'd love to hear some of the stats you came up with. Where did the Chiefs stand statistically in this quarter of the season, or this what would be like 22% of the season?
Yeah, no, it's you're right. 3 out of 4. That's all that matters. We're moving on to the second quarter. Spags always talks about, this is something that Steve Spagnuolo does say, that he, after that first quarter of the season is when he really feels like he can start, doing what he wants to do with the defense. He's kind of learning that first quarter. And we've seen that with Spags' defense over and over. What's really interesting is Spags' defense is already doing a lot of creative stuff through a first quarter. So look out, apparently. But no, let's start on the offensive side of the ball, Stags. I have, a negative one about Patrick Mahomes, but it is just, noteworthy about how, how ineffective this pass offense has been so far. If the season ended today, Patrick Mahomes' 2023 season would feature career lows in completion percentage, yards per attempt, passer rating, and his interception rate would be his career high. So he's basically having, efficiency-wise, his worst year through 4 games. And that's just, a symbolism or a representation of how, ugly, clunky this pass offense has been. And it's the receivers, it's Mahomes' confidence in them, it's his trust in maybe, the pocket at times, it's, and not Kelsey kind of, maybe having a slow start to the season, but it's just a way to contextualize that, we are seeing, one of the ugliest stretches in Mahomes' career right now. It's only going to get better. This truly is one of the worst.
That's funny. It's funny to hear you say that out loud, because Mahomes so far has 1,006 passing yards, so he's on pace for over 4,000 yards this year. Certainly not 5,000 like we're used to, but he's got 8 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. So that interception ratio being the highest of his career is still 2-to-1 touchdowns to interceptions, which has kind of been the benchmark for quarterbacks for a long time. And he's 4th in the league in QBR. So, he's not blowing the league out of the water by any means, but you've had 2 of the 3 games where he's been unimpressive. The Bears game being the exception there. And so it is interesting. So I guess you could say 3 of the 4 games, but it's interesting that even Mahomes' worst is still top 4 in the league when it comes to quarterbacks. That's just how good he has been over his career.
Yeah, I know. And he is still up there in yards, but like completion percentage, and this is a testament to his receivers, he's 21st in the NFL in completion percentage right now. That's low. But again, that's not a quarterback stat a lot of the time, right? And maybe we can check, drop rate. He has, he's up there in it. But I have an interesting one for you here. According to PFF, Rashee Rice has, this is against zone coverage, has 11 targets, 11 catches, 127 yards, and 6 first downs. That's against zone coverage.
Right.
And that's why he's playing a lot, right? But against man coverage, he has 5 targets, 0 catches, and they did give him a drop in one of those. So, and to go with this, Travis Kelce this year against man coverage is registering a 0 passer rating when targeted. He has only caught 1 of the 5 passes thrown his way in those situations, and another of them was the interception he was thrown to in week 4. So basically what I'm getting at is the Chiefs' best playmakers right now are still not beating man coverage, and that might be our biggest flaw right now, is that we don't have someone necessarily beating man coverage.
Yeah, that's a really good catch. It used to be the case that you could not man up against the Chiefs, right? They had too much speed.
Right.
They would just burn you deep. That just wasn't a thing that's not a smart thing to do against Tyreek Hill, obviously. Still isn't in Miami. But now all of a sudden the Chiefs can beat zone only. That's an interesting stat, and not that surprising based on the way both of those guys have played. Obviously, they're in very different points in their career, but they both have a little bit of that zone beater, ability on tape. Kelce, you hope that this isn't a sign that he's struggling more, is athletically late in his career, but you would like to see somebody step up to the plate there and be able to beat man. Kadarius Toney should be able to. Sky Moore, as we talked about, with his ability to run routes, should be able to beat man coverage. But so far, it's not happening near enough.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. They're the only 2 beating zone coverage right now, because everyone else is struggling to in general, and that's why the pass offense is looking so bad. And then, but just in general, they're not winning against man coverage. And then here I have Sky Moore, when he is being targeted this year in general, is registering a 71 passer rating right now. Last year, I believe it was 73. So we're not seeing an improvement in that area in terms of Mahomes, having success getting him the ball. But let's look at defense, because it's always good to kind of look at where, the defense is stacking up right now. I had a tweet last week about where Karlaftis stacked up in the NFL. Well, here we go. Through 4 weeks, Stags, these are the only players with more quarterback pressures than George Karlaftis in the NFL. Aiden Hutchinson, Micah Parsons, Max Crosby, Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Aaron Donald, Khalil Mack. That's the list. The only players with more pressure.
I mean, I've been saying it all along. George Karlaftis is an elite pass rusher in this league. I don't know where you would ever get the impression that that he wasn't right that high. No, he's been great this year. He's been great this year. He's really feels like he's moving quicker. He's more decisive. He's got more counters and moves than he's had in the past. And he's definitely benefiting from Chris Jones being back. That was a big deal for him, for Chris Jones to come back and draw some of that attention and chase some players into his arms and vice versa. I think those two seem to work pretty well together. So I'm happy to see Chris Jones and George Karlaftis putting up good results, and then bodes well for the defense in the future.
Well, yeah, and if you bring in if you take out week 1 when Chris Jones wasn't playing, which obviously changes up how everyone's going to succeed, right? Since week 2, these are the only players with more pressures than George Karlaftis: Micah Parsons, Max Crosby, and Aiden Hutchinson. And so George Karlaftis, since Chris Jones has gotten in there and has really taken over, and taken the attention of pass protections, he's just taken advantage. He really does, man. He rarely gets locked up single blocked anymore. I mean, if he is single blocked, he gets around it within the 3 seconds. It's just a matter if the quarterback gets rid of the ball or if he's, if he's holding on to it or not. So it's great to see. But he still does, he's not the most dynamic rusher, so he still has to win with that effort and that consistency over and over. So it takes a toll on you doing it over and over throughout the entire season. So we'll see if he can keep that up. But definitely shout out George Karlaftis. But before we move on, just some other general Chiefs stats, from the team, how the kind of it stacks up within the team. PFF tracks defensive stops, which is like tackles that constitute a failure. So not just any tackle, but a tackle that really does, effectively stop the offense from doing something successful. Drew Tranquill has 4 more than anybody else on the team. And he has played a limited snap count through the first 2 weeks, then obviously has started these past 2 weeks with Nick Bolton out. But he is just all over the place. But it tied for second is Leo Chenal, who is also on a limited snap count, not playing as much. And Trent McDuffie is actually tied with Leo Chenal, and so is Mike Dana. So you're talking about those 4 guys. Mm-hmm. We love touting these guys as guys that get around the ball. But, man, I love how the stats bear it out, because a guy like Trent McDuffie, someone that I maybe questioned if he could be a Snead kind of player in the slot, he's playing like he can play against the run and really fill.
Absolutely. All of those guys have been so solid. Tackling's been good out of each of them. You're right. Drew Tranquill, you can't miss him on the field. When he's starting or when he's out there, you see 23 flying around. And it really does. It really does make a difference. It's, first of all, startling just to see that number on a linebacker, but also he's gotten in some really good work in the first couple of weeks. Known as strictly a pass coverage guy. He's obviously, he had over 100 tackles last year. He's not just a coverage backer. He's really a pretty good all-around linebacker at this point. He got beaten once in coverage this week, but it was on a play where you can't really fault him too much, I don't think.
Yeah. No, it was a tough play, but definitely a good play. I want to shout out also Joshua Williams because I know the attention's been on Trent McDuffie, right? He's been PFF's highest graded corner. People said that, or they showed that, and I don't like just looking at PFF's grade, so I don't really, care too much for that. But I do like their stats on catch percentage, passer rating against when targeted. Here's Joshua Williams' stats this year. He has allowed 3 catches on 8 targets, which is a 38% catch rate, and he's allowed a 48.4 passer rating when targeted this year in those 8 targets. So if you give me a second and you talk about catch rates among starting cornerbacks in the NFL, 38% is quite the number. And so, I'm going to filter out this right here real quick and give you guys a little bit of a reference point, because You know, you're talking about guys like Trayvon Diggs and Martin Emerson Jr., Akilla Witherspoon is the only guys with a lower catch percentage this year among starting cornerbacks than Joshua Williams. And he's not a starter necessarily, but he is in the nickel package and he has enough snaps to qualify. So, yeah, I mean, he's having one of the best, catch rates in the entire NFL among corners right now.
Yeah, and considering he's really been in a competition for that job his entire career, and as the number 3 corner, seems like he's won that competition, at least for now. And we always thought he had a great upside with his physical ability, his length. And so, yeah, it's exciting to see him coming around. I mean, how good has Brett Veach and team been at identifying young corners that he doesn't have to pay $1 million, a large amount of money to. You can pay only $1 million and get a guy like Joshua Williams and really, along with Trent McDuffie, along with L'Jarius Sneed, that's a pretty good defensive back room, and they've got depth there. So with Jalen Watson, really, he was inactive this week, I know, but with him laying in the weight, whenever he gets on the field, he seems to make plays as well. Yeah. So really good to see Williams taking that next step.
Yeah, well, those are my quarter stats. I just think the Chiefs defense, I think in general, you can just say the Chiefs defense, we have a lot of guys making plays, and that's kind of fun to see, not just the top guys.
That's right. And that's what's going to keep this team sustainable and to keep that dynasty talk alive is when you have a broad base of young players making plays and not just concentrated on a few stars. Now, as we go to break, I want to concentrate on Ron's question of the week. We're going to come up with a good title for this, but what player am I? Ron, see if you can stump me for once.
All right, I'm stumping you here. No, we'll see. A player that played for both the Chiefs and Vikings. I was drafted by the Chiefs in the mid-2000s, but I was drafted to play a different position than I was known for in my career. I was allowed to walk in free agency after the last year of my rookie deal, to the chagrin of some, and I earned my first of 4 first-team All-Pro awards that last year with Kansas City. And let's just say I had a very nice number. That's all I'm going to tell you, Stags.
I actually am a little perplexed on this one. I thought I had it, and one detail of this is throwing me off. I'll give it some thought while we hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with more Out of Structure podcast on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network right after this. And we're back on the Out of Structure podcast. Thanks for sticking with us for the second half. We're about to get to your mailbag questions, but in the meantime, Ron's got me a little perplexed on his "Who am I?" NFL player question of the week. I thought, after the first clue, which was drafted by the Chiefs in the mid-2000s to play a different position, I immediately said it's Jared Allen. That's exactly where I went. But Jared Allen wasn't he traded? And
you got it. Yeah, no, you got it. He was not. He was just signed by the Vikings. I looked it up. I thought he was traded too, but I wanted to make sure. So,
yeah, I'm going to call you out on that one a little bit. It looks like
on his reference page, it says he was just signed by the Vikings, but maybe I got that wrong.
That may have been his last contract. He was traded for a pretty substantial package of draft picks. The Jared Allen trade was pretty influential for the building of this team back in 2008. The Chiefs got a first-round pick, 2/3, and swapped a 6th-round pick in exchange for Jared Allen. So
there you go.
That's why I was perplexed, because I remember that trade being a big deal, because isn't that partially what set up the draft that led to kind of the rebuild, the quick rebuild starting after.
Well, Pro Football Reference failed me. I definitely thought it was a trade, but I was like, let me make sure. And then it just said he signed in that offseason. I was like, oh, okay, bet. But probably signed the contract after he was traded, which makes sense.
That 2009 draft class for the Kansas City Chiefs, I remember this draft class, but do you remember who they took?
Talking about the 08 class, probably with Brandon Albert, Brandon Flowers, Jamal Charles. Talking about that class.
Yeah. So they got a chunk of those draft picks from the Jared Allen trade, and that's what allowed them to make that one of the better drafts of our lifetime, which hopefully they're trumping now in this last couple of years with Brett Veach and company. So Jared Allen, I mean, it sealed it when you said he had a nice number. Then I thought, well, man, the trades throw me off. All right. Mailbag questions of the week. Our guy Jake Wilson at Jake for Now on Twitter, or X as it's known now. Veach is known for aggressive moves, but he's demonstrated some restraint. How has his discipline shaped the Chiefs' on-field product? I'm jumping ahead here. So what can they do or what can they not do based on the aggression of Brett Veach?
Well, I mean, I would tell you that, having Patrick Mahomes, and we all know this, just allows you to kind of be, more aggressive with, the way you want to be a GM, whether that, one way or the other, right? Like if you want to be someone that signs a bunch of dudes, like it's probably going to work out because you have Patrick Mahomes. But if you want to be a team that just plays through the draft and gets a bunch of guys and builds through a young roster, it's probably going to work out because you have Patrick Mahomes. So it's one of those things where like Veach knows that. He's smart enough to understand that he has the golden egg, the golden goose. I mean, and so he can kind of just play to what he wants to do. And he also knows he has Andy Reid that's going to make the best out of the talent that he has. So he knows that he can kind of buy into what he believes, what like Veach believes as what he learned as a scout, right? Growing up in a front office, like he doesn't have to necessarily worry too much about, okay, like what is everyone else doing? Like how do I need to catch up? Like he can just kind of buy into his own process because, it's worked so far. And hey, even if it's like not the most efficient process, if like let's say like some, impartial study, like studied every GM or whatever, and ranked them or, on how they process or how they've drafted, how they've signed for, like, it doesn't matter. Because Patrick Mahomes gives him the confidence that like it's going to work out. Andy Reid gives him the confidence it's going to work out. So they can just have a confident front office that's doing things with a plan in mind. They're not just changing their plan every year because, oh shoot, it didn't work this year, so we got to, catch up with the league because we weren't doing it the way everyone else is doing it. And so again, I guess all that to say is I just feels like it gives Veach the confidence to be aggressive and not signing these guys to long free agent deals like Chris Jones, like Tyreek Hill, like Orlando Brown Jr. And, if a guy wants to keep testing him, he'll just keep pushing it. But if a guy is going to say, all right, I'll take the deal you initially gave me, none of these guys have. None of these guys have taken that deal, but they're willing to do that. So, and that's the thing. It's just they just kind of have a plan and they're sticking to it because they know, 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to work out no matter what the results are on the way there, because Patrick Mahomes is the quarterback.
Yeah, the question is mostly about the restraint that he's shown and how he's not given out those big contracts. When Brett Veach was first hired, the consensus or what we talked about was the fact that this was an Andy Reid hire, right? This is a guy who has a consistent approach that is really symbiotic with Andy Reid. What did Andy Reid learn from his time at Philadelphia when they assembled the dream team and they spent all this money in free agency? How did that work out for him? It was really the years where they drafted well and they ended up having a good defense, right, that Andy Reid was most successful there, not the years where they spent a bunch of money in free agency and tried to load up on big name players. So Veach, has, I think, brought some of that lesson learned, some of that restraint, and some of the discipline to say, we've got to build this thing for the long term. We can't get into a bunch of bad contracts and then really handcuff ourselves. They certainly, you would think that would lead to them being able to extend more of their own players, but they've been really reluctant to do that even. It really shows up in the youth on this roster. The fact that they've got a really relatively inexpensive roster outside of a couple of players, and they're able to continually cycle guys through there. To me, it's a testament to their talent evaluation, to his discipline and not going out and spending big money in free agency or on their own players. They've managed to put together a championship roster around Patrick Mahomes. Yes, that's the ace in the hole there for sure. But I wonder if he has some PTSD or some baggage there from previous Eagles iterations where they just have not found the success in free agency that you would expect.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is, I think a lot of being a GM is just like staying true to yourself, right? Or like staying true to what you believe and not coming off, or just kind of saying, oh, shoot, it didn't work this year, so we need to switch it up. It's just easier to stay to your path when you have Mahomes. When you don't have Mahomes and you're in quarterback purgatory, it's easier to convince yourself, look, we got to do it another way. We got to, kind of, change directions, change ships. In the middle of kind of a process that we thought was going to take 2 to 3 years, but we're panicking because it doesn't look good on the field. So, because there have been times where Veach hasn't looked good for what he's done, on the field. It hasn't looked good, but yeah, I agree. I think his draft, the draft and the team building, it has been really good around Mahomes these last couple of years specifically.
Next question from Thomas Ramirez and from Brian Thomas are both talking about how the wide receivers have not gotten things going yet. Brian is asking, why is that happening? Is it play calling? Is it Mahomes not trusting them and they're not getting open? Thomas suggests does it make sense to use the run game more until the wide receivers get going? I'm going to answer Thomas's part. I think we're unanimous here in saying absolutely they should be using the run game, especially when they can get it going like they did this week. That Jets front is no joke. It's not like they were running against a bunch of nobodies. This is an offense that should be able to run the ball with the offensive line they've built, with the bevy of running backs that they have available to them. They look the best when they're balanced, and it worked really well against the Bears, and it worked against the Jets as well, even when nothing else was working. So 100% they should be using the run game a little bit more. But what's going on with the wide receivers, you think, Ron? I know we've got some articles coming about that, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and we kind of mentioned it earlier, but a lot of it is the fact that, first of all, they don't have a true man beater right now. Someone that if it's a 3rd and 5, a 3rd and 6, and the other defense is gonna line up with man coverage, press man, who is going to get separation and win on the route? Kadarius Toney is a candidate, but he is playing limited snaps right now. We talked about that. Sky Moore should be somebody that can do that. One of his best traits should be, releasing off the line of scrimmage and creating separation in that way. We haven't necessarily seen that as much, although the Jacksonville touchdown was an example of that. Man-to-man, he creates separation and gets the back shoulder touchdown. MVS isn't going to do that. Justin Watson's not going to do that. They are deep threats, vertical threats that are going to win, as kind of in deeper routes, downfield routes against zone coverage more often. And so first, that's the number one thing, is they don't really have a man beater. Travis Kelce obviously is someone that can, depending on the matchup, but he also, struggles at times to create separation against, certain man coverage defenders. But hey, against zone, they should always, be able to play well. Well, that's the problem is these young receivers, it's harder than you think, I guess is the way to put it, to succeed against zone coverage or it's harder to be disciplined, I guess, than you think. You think it's okay, you just find a window between 2 zone defenders and sit down. Well, there's a lot of little details to kind of where to sit down and how often, or how much you should move. And I do think you're seeing some of that with Mahomes, and I've even been guilty of maybe, pointing to plays on film and saying, look, Mahomes is not hitting these windows when they're open. But it could just be that these receivers are not hitting their landmarks as cleanly as they need to. They're not kind of settling as early as they need to. They're maybe coming too close to the inside, to the defender, to their inside. And that's, if he leads too much that way and the throw naturally leads that way, it's going to be a pick. And Mahomes kind of maybe feels that, even if it looks like it's an open window, because he can feel these receivers not settling enough. And I think that's the underrated part of Juju Smith-Schuster. He was very good at the zone, settling into zones and finding the zones and over the middle and being a trusted target to catch between tight zone defenders. I think that's another thing. Travis Kelce should be very good at that, right? And he has been this year, and that's where the pass offense has only succeeded, is him against zone defense. Rashee Rice all of a sudden has been succeeding because they're getting him, he's actually doing a pretty good job of finding space in small windows and then getting upfield quickly. That's the other part of this. These Sky Moore isn't getting upfield when he gets the ball as quickly and explosively as you'd like to see it. Rashee Rice, when you see him get the ball, he is lightning quick upfield, and he's getting the most out of those plays. So that's why they're working him in more. But they're the only two. Rice and Kelsey are the only two guys really, working those zones well at the moment. Even MVS, I would say, is not doing it as well as he should be. And so all that to say, it's really these receivers. Just it seems like they're not. The younger receivers are not finding their way against zone as easy as they should. They're missing Juju in that way. But then they just don't have a man beater, and I think they projected to have one in Sky and Tony. But Tony could still get it going. Sky needs to show some improvement.
No, it's a good point. And I think at some point, teams are just going to, start running a lot of man, right? I mean, and force the Chiefs to try to beat it. So they got to be aware of that and finding some solutions to that, finding some scheming, to scheme it up, find some man beaters, find some things that they can do. I feel like our point earlier is pretty valid. They haven't really found the right mix at wide receiver yet. They're letting everybody have a target or two a game. I'm not sure that is going to ever build enough chemistry or enough consistency for them to really look like a good solid unit. And the other thing is, I was thinking as you were talking, is that there's so much we don't know about what goes on in that room and what goes on that field. It takes the quarterback and the receiver both to be 100% on the same page to make a play like that work. You don't know if it was a bad pass or a bad route but you do see. I think you can see on tape that Mahomes is thrown to a spot that he expects somebody to be there, and it's not always the case that somebody's been there. So it would tend to lead you to believe that there's some stuff going on with the wide receivers and their precision there, but it's really hard to tell with any kind of level of certainty.
Well, and I would say too, it's always a thing about how Andy Reid's offense is hard for receivers to learn and stuff. Well, it's not just this made up theme, right? It's because he makes them learn all these different positions, the Y, the Z, the X, and that could be information overload for the wrong person, right? And if they have a bunch of guys that maybe aren't, just feeling comfortable in those roles, it's just going to make it harder for them to run the offense the way they want to.
All right. Well, last two questions here from Dean and Justin Olson. In fact, I think we had some late additions, so these may not be the last two. But Dean at Captain Pylon says, Chicago aside, why does it seem like the offense can't perform unless the game is close? Justin points out that the Chiefs seem to look good against good teams and bad against bad teams, wondering why that might be the case. Do you think there's some element of that, the Chiefs that play to their opponent or play better in close games and are not comfortable blowing teams out?
Yeah, Justin just made me laugh because he ends it with, now this year it's not good against any teams. And it's like, come on, dude. We looked good last week. Don't forget about Chicago already.
That's right.
Dean didn't forget about Chicago. It's always been like that with Andy Reid. It drove us really crazy with Alex Smith because, hey, you have Alex Smith. You can't be letting off the gas pedal ever. You got to, that's not the type of court. Like with Mahomes, it's a little different because you feel like, and it's probably not, it's not good to feel this way, but you feel like Mahomes can always turn it on if he needs to, if a game gets close like this one on Sunday night. Because they did go up 17-0. It did feel like Mahomes was kind of playing carelessly after that. And those were the two interceptions. They both happened after 17-0. And so, I think there is something to when the competitive juices aren't firing as much for the coaches. Andy Reid's, this is his 20 whatever year doing it. Patrick Mahomes, he's seen so many big games. When those competitive juices aren't firing, they get a little lackadaisical. And they do, I always remember the Rams game last year, Zach. Very random game at Arrowhead, though, and he threw the pick in the end zone where he just threw it right to the defender. Literally just he was trying to dirt it, but he just threw it right to it. And they were up 26-10 or whatever. It's just, they have these games and they just, when the game is in hand, a lot of times, or they feel like it's in hand, they feel comfortable and all right, we got these guys. Yeah, I do think Mahomes isn't as on point as he needs to be. So the funny thing though is New York's a really good defense, so he shouldn't have been feeling that way. But it's just that 17-0 start might have helped.
Any other questions out there? I thought there was a couple that came in late.
Well, Thomas Ramirez asked us about the run game. That was a little later, but he also asked us about, if there's any receivers we would be looking to trade out or trade to for out there. And, to me, that could be the solution, Stags. I don't know your thoughts on it. But I'm good. I want to see them kind of, trial by fire, right? Trial by error, use this year to see, who's going to emerge, because next year it's not like they just magically have, in the offseason we'll talk about trades for sure, but for right now I'm good. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd be really surprised if they make a move. It's not that I wouldn't want them to, but I'd be pretty surprised if they do. Obviously, Veach has shown some aggression. He's out there, keeping his eyes open for who's available. But the only name I've heard come up a lot is Mike Evans, who, would be a lot of fun, but not in the right phase of his career for this team, and maybe not the right style of player either.
Well, yeah, now they're winning too. Bucks are 3-1, top of that division, so they're probably going to ride with that. No, I'm trying to think. Yeah, at the bottom of kind of the standings here, that's where you kind of have to look, right?
I saw some debate about Chase Claypool out there. I thought that's
stay away.
A lot of times you look at the guys that are available, and there's these big lumbering, wide receiver types that fans always fall in love with, and then for some reason a lot of them don't pan out in the league. I don't know if there's probably not a lot of AFC teams that are going to be excited about trading to the Chiefs either. So who from the NFC is going to be actually available?
Yeah, Panthers are 0-4. I don't know who you'd get out of that. But yeah, you could go to the Bears and say, hey, look, Darnell Mooney. I don't know his contract, but he's a nice receiver for them. I don't know if he's any better than what the Chiefs have necessarily. But I don't know. I really don't think there's anything out there worth it. Like you said, Mike Evans made sense at first, but now they're winning. I doubt he's going anywhere.
The Panthers have a few guys that I would be interested in. Laviska Shenault is a player I've always enjoyed watching, and he never has been really used the way that I think Andy Reid could use him. He's very much probably a McCole Hardman type player, and maybe they're missing that, especially with Kadarius Toney being banged up. DJ Shark, obviously he's been hurt a lot, but a player that should have been on our radar in the offseason. So from a wide receiver standpoint, hey, Amir Smith-Marset, maybe he's available at this point.
Hey, man, we'll end it with that. Like, should they have kept him over like a Richie James? Like, Richie James is hurt right now. Should they have just I don't know if he's done much for the Panthers. They're 0-4, I guess. I don't know if he's done, much enough. But,
I believe he's their returner, but he hasn't caught a pass yet.
You're right.
And I think that's the way it probably would have gone here, frankly. I don't know if he'd be the answer on offense either. But I think Veach will probably look around the league and see if there's anybody in the bargain bin that might be of use. But I'm like you. I'm not sure that I would do anything at this point. I think you got to cull down the roster of receivers and find your right three and really start to focus in on getting them some targets.
Yeah, my thing is they have all year. We know this team's going to be in the playoffs. They're going to use this team knows what to do. This team's going to use the season to find what's rest for the postseason. And I'm sure by the time we get there, it may be a problem, but they'll have their best group possible, I would imagine, by the time they get there.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to make this a tradition here. I'm going to hand it back to Ron for his preview of the upcoming game while I step away. Really appreciate everybody listening and being here with us on the Out of Structure podcast. There's a lot to come, so stay with us every week, every Tuesday. Make sure you follow, like, rate, review, and all of that. But, Ron, what are you seeing from the Vikings? How do you think the Chiefs match up here? And do you think that's pretty likely this team can get to 4-1 and stay on track?
Man, I'm excited for this game. It's going to be a fun game. First of all, it absolutely is, because the Chiefs and the Vikings are both teams that like to throw the ball around, even if the Chiefs haven't looked as great at it this year. The Chiefs are going to get their chance to do so. The Vikings blitz, before last week, I saw it was one of the highest rates in the entire NFL. Brian Flores, that former Patriots disciple, he was in Miami. He was the head coach there. He loves to blitz. It was about 60% of his snaps were blitzes that I saw. And so That's going to be Patrick Mahomes' bread and butter, right? He's going to be able to beat that if they choose to continue to do so, which I imagine they will. He's kind of that kind of guy. I'm going to do my thing, make it work, because their personnel is pretty suspect in terms of who they have kind of making plays for them in the secondary and on defense just in general. You have Harrison Smith, who's way past his prime at this point, kind of still making plays for them as kind of their main guy in the back end. They have Byron Murphy as well in the slot making plays as well. But I think this pass defense will be exploitable. It'll be a good test for the Chiefs pass offense, but they will have to do so and have to have a good game, in my opinion, because the Vikings offense could absolutely push this Chiefs defense. Kirk Cousins is one of the league leaders in passing yards this year, mainly because they've been in a lot of competitive games, but right now he is third in the league in passing yards, has the most passing touchdowns in the NFL with 11. And they throw the ball a lot. He has the second most pass attempts in the NFL, the most completions. And obviously they have wide receiver Justin Jefferson, the elite wide receiver who has established himself. It'll be interesting to see if the Chiefs, and they will probably because of Justin Jefferson's kind of ability of size or combination of size and athleticism, right? They're going to put L'Jarius Sneed, just like they have been, on him as the number one wideout. And then they're going to have Trent McDuffie and Jordan Addison, the rookie wide receiver out of USC, who maybe some Chiefs fans wanted in the draft. I was not a big Jordan Addison fan, but he's been having a huge year so far as a rookie, as their second wide receiver. And then they have TJ Hawkinson. That's going to be a good matchup for Justin Reed, kind of coming down, playing him man-to-man a lot of times in third downs. Kirk Cousins loves going to him, especially when the Chiefs are going to heat him up with blitzes. He's going to want to check down to Hawkinson. It's going to be a big game for Justin Reed to make sure tackles, which he has been this year, and just to make sure he finishes those plays. But yeah, it's going to be a fun matchup. I expect points. I would take the over. I haven't looked at it yet, but I imagine the over is going to hit in this game no matter what the number is. It's in Minnesota, that dome. Minnesota's 1-3. They're desperate for a win. They know their offense is what's going to win them the game. Chiefs defense looks susceptible against New York last week. They're going to maybe try to make some of those same kind of moves. Maybe those play action, heavy protection, get Justin Jefferson one-on-one. Chiefs got to have a good plan for him, whether it's bracketing him in the red zone, which they've been doing all year with a safety, or just mugging him up with Sneed and having that safety kind of play over the top in the middle of the field. But all that to say, going to be a fun game, guys. Make sure you listen to the podcast network this week as we lead up. Make sure you follow the site. We're going to have film reviews from the Jets game, but also previews for this Vikings game. And we'll be back with you next week to talk about it. Stags will be back with us. Out of Structure Podcast. Appreciate you listening. Make sure you give a 5-star review, and we'll catch you next time. Appreciate you listening.